Let's talk about one of the most exciting subject matters that exists in the universe: bureaucracy. So I personally think that taxes are pretty great. This isn't an ANCAP video. If you came here expecting that, you have been disappointed. They are a great way to make people pay for the services that a government provides more cheaply and of higher quality than a market could because of the nature of those particular services. If you benefit more, you pay more, and you also pay out of solidarity with your fellow human beings. We live in a society. That said, nobody likes paying taxes, and it's not only because you have this money and now you have to give it away. This other thing, for many people, might be an even bigger factor. Taxes are fucking complicated. Like, seriously, in many countries, tax is the most complicated field of the legal system. And everyone is just kind of expected to know everything about it. So when it comes to creating laws and policy, there is a principle of reasonability. You're supposed to make laws that people can actually reasonably follow. Like, you can't make a law that says everybody needs to hover over the ground on Sundays because people can't hover over the ground. And by extension, it's also unreasonable because it is utterly unnecessary to make it so everyone has to play the floor is lava on Sundays. In areas where you do need to implement laws and policies that are unreasonable, you need to provide mechanisms by which those things are no longer unreasonable. Like, for instance, if you are a driver in most countries, when you encounter a traffic accident, you are supposed to be able to deal with the basics of managing that situation and administering first aid. Now, of course, first aid isn't something that you are born with inherent knowledge of. This has to be taught to you, and most of the time, school doesn't do this, so it's unreasonable to expect a person to just know first aid. This is why in most countries, in order to obtain a driver's license, you need to become certified in the basics of first aid. This isn't like a binding legal principle, it's a pragmatic one, because when you make laws that people can't follow, you're gonna get problems. Enter taxes. Everybody needs to do some amount of taxes. If you work a 9 to 5, you will often have accounting departments that take care of some of that for you. But generally speaking, the assumption is that you will be able to do all of the tax-related work, that you will know what to do in the first place and not discover what works and what doesn't work by means of trial and error as you are filing the tax return, but that you already knew what you were doing before you started. Given how complicated taxes are, this is absurd. Like with many things, we have people who specialize in taxes. Tax accountants. I do not know of a single country in history ever that had "this is how you do taxes" as a part of its educational curriculum that was mandatory for all citizens. Tax accountants are a white-collar job. They are high-level specialists that in many cases had to go to university to acquire these skills. But if you don't have the money to pay a tax accountant, the government considers it reasonable to expect of you, individual person, to have the entire skill set of a tax accountant. Do you see the problem here? Let's for a moment just disregard the United States. We're a cartel of software development companies, because that's how low the bar is. It is basically cucked the government into never simplifying the tax code or the process by which it is filed, or developing proprietary software that helps its citizens do their taxes because they need to make their own money. Bureaucracy is always complicated, of course, and there are exceptions to the rule that governments expect you to always understand bureaucracy. Like, for instance, there is a reasonable expectation for people to be able to speak the language of the land when they engage in the bureaucratic process. Yet, the government still, for exceptional cases, provides bilingual forms and interpreters so people can partake in this process. It does not do this for taxes. And this is despite the fact that with some instruction you can get a very solid grasp of a language in a couple months, and very often for immigrants, governments will provide these courses in order to help them integrate into the new society they have moved to. Tax accounting, once again, is a highly specialized white-collar job that everyone is just expected to do and you do not get taught ever. Not only that, but if you grow up in a country, the country will have a huge part of its mandatory educational curriculum dedicated to teaching you all of the ins and outs of its language. When you stand accused of a crime, which is a very exceptional situation, most governments will just give you a lawyer. If you are poor and get sued, sometimes even when you sue someone else, in many countries, they will also pay for your lawyer. But if you want a tax accountant who actually knows what the fuck they're doing, you will have to pay for that yourself. And this is despite the fact that tax law is very often a lot more complicated than criminal law. And now think about how complicated criminal law already is. There are, of course, some efforts to make this whole process a lot less of a hassle. For instance, German tax collection agencies use a service called Elster, which is, a software that helps you do your taxes online. It's very convenient. It checks all of your forms for errors, it gives you marginal instructions, even explains some of the terminology occasionally a little bit. Now, of course, most of those explanations are just gonna refer to like clauses and articles and texts as delineated by numbers in the larger tax code, which are written by lawyers for lawyers. But at least they try, I guess. Although, frankly, sometimes the explanations make the tax code even more confusing to the uninitiated. The people who work at the tax office often don't know what the fuck is going on. So clearly, on some level, at least the government agencies understand that no, it isn't reasonable to expect people to just know all of this. So that is why we'll just let things slide and we'll try to bend the rules in order to simplify bureaucracy and develop things like Elster. Which, can we just take a moment to appreciate that Elster literally means magpie? You tell me again how we Germans don't have a sense of humor. But I think this whole thing is just a symptom of a problem that has cropped up ever since civilization moved farther and farther away from the cave. Taxes have existed for a long time. Tax returns are a very, very recent phenomenon, but we understand that for the proper functioning of a complex society, we need that kind of stuff. It's unfortunate, but the only way of structuring such a complex society is by means of bureaucracy. It is the only thing that can manage it. Now, this is someone speaking who hates, I hate bureaucracy so much, but I accept that it is necessary. However, as civilization has become increasingly complex and globalization has become increasingly complex, so has all of the bureaucracy attached. You might say there's been a sort of feature creep in the way that everything is done. Every sort of government agency or public authority has its own extremely complicated internal system and different systems by which it interacts with different areas of different parts of the government and then also other governments. And then you have private institutions where things look much the same. You have this to a lesser extent in like private households. My Discord server has limited bureaucratic processes. And you are expected to know and be able to perfectly educate yourself on all of these systems, even though the people who actually understand them are specialists working within those systems, and even they have problems. And again, no part of the educational system deems it necessary to teach people how to bureaucracy. The thing is, nothing in hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary history has prepared us for the act of filing tax returns. So as things continue getting more and more complex, thereby also increasing the complexity of the bureaucracy, something will have to change. And I think the very first thing that will have to change is the attitude. Because it is not reasonable to expect people to be a lawyer in addition to being a plumber, or a musician, or a teacher, or an oral surgeon, or a priest. You are at that point not purposefully, but by the interplay of so many overlapping complex systems, creating expectations that are de facto unreasonable for any individual person to follow. And the point at which you've created a bureaucratic system that people cannot reasonably participate in, you have a problem. Because then the system falls apart. And if the system that manages a complex society falls apart, so does that complex society. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, maybe buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, pay your taxes, my many billionaire followers. And see you around, cunts.